Bay Area Backstage on location at the San Jose Comic-Con.
I'm so honored to be here at Steve Wyatt's new first Comic-Con ever. I think it's going to be a success. I'm honored to be here with friends and Comic-Con fans, family, and to talk about how it was to work with Jack Kirby, the greatest genius that we ever saw in comic books. We will never see his likes again. Everything, in my opinion, that Jack Kirby drew and wrote was his, how's it pronounced? When soldiers come back wounded, it's a
PTSD.
PTSD. I think that's how he handled it. All of his books are about fighting something. Even the love comics, it's about fighting for something. And I believe that's how Jack handled the fact that he saw his buddies blown away in a foxhole right there with him and that kind of stuff. And he's the guy that somebody would say, there's a guy in the lobby 12 stories below that says he's a Nazi, and Jack's ready to get up and go down and punch him out, you know. I'm digressing, but that's my middle name.
Yes.
Also, most people know me by my real name. This is the Department of Redundancy Department.
I was dying. I was going to the light. I said, "Oh, it's time. The rapture has come."
About to launch a new book called Badge Tunes, which is a series of short stories about how we all turn our problems into monsters and how you fight those monsters. And I'm gonna go do a panel on Jack Kirby, of course, because why else do we do any of this? And having a blast making comics, doing drawings and stuff. So that's what's going on. I've been sitting around figuring out how to write and draw the comics I want to do. You know, finally sat down, got old enough that I said, I can do what I want. I'm going to figure out how to write and draw my own stories. And that was the whole point of the pandemic for me. So it was not a loss of time, you know. It wasn't fun because we're all scared of dying. You know, it was okay. I have this bittersweet smile of like, I like making comics, but the pandemic really sucked. You know? So that's been what I've been doing. It's nice to be back at a show. Badge Tunes, it's going to be a comic book. You can check out my site, markbadger.com or .org to get on the newsletter to find out how it's going to be released and when it's going to be released, because with publishing, you know, things have changed so much in the last 10 years. I'm not quite sure what to do yet. The business plan has not been done. The comics have been done, but the business part of it hasn't been figured out. And that's my goal in the next couple of weeks, to figure that out, what I'm going to do in the next 6 months to a year.
Okay, well, I'm Bruce Simon, and I'm an underground cartoonist. I'm a relic of the underground comics days in the Bay Area. And now I publish a series of books on comics history called Hoo Ha, which excavates some of the greatest comics of the earlier part of the last century, not this fun one we're living with, and also on various subjects like burlesque, silent film, classic cartoons about dogs from the 20s and 30s and stuff like that. So that's how I've been keeping busy during the pandemic. Well, more issues of Hoo Ha right now. We have an issue coming out next month with what we try and do is find cartoonists who are like unheralded today, but we're actually pretty genius, though, and relevant. So we try and do things like that and bring them to the people of this miserable century. Well, if you have extra time, and a lot of people do, use it to advantage and get on projects. Don't waste your time, because you'll regret it when you get busy again. So if there's projects you want to do, now's the time to get on it. That's my advice. If you're interested in seeing Hoo Ha magazine, go to www.hoohah.net and read about it. There we go.
Hello, Jack. How are you, sir?
Check out this panel featuring Royer, Bruce Simon, and Mark Badger, talking all things Kirby.
I never. That's what I gave you.
Yeah.
And then it was so nice that the company things that other people wrote after that. One of my biggest fans, at least on the Facebook groups, said something that was so literate. I want to copy it.
Okay.
Because he explained what I brought to Jack. I never felt that I was inking Jack Kirby. I was finishing Jack's pencils and ink. And I don't know if you can see the distinction, but ask away.
Okay, well, what Mike's referring to, and you guys know Mike's work on Jack on the Fourth World and lots of other projects for Marvel and beyond that, and Captain Victory and Silver Star. Jack, who'd been in the business by the time Mike had started working with him, had been in the business over 30 years when, in 1971, when Mike started working.
68 when I started working with him,
but I mean,
nobody
for the
saw
comics.
comic book stuff until 71.
Right. He worked with lots of inkers, good, bad, and indifferent, because that's the business of comics. When Jack started working for DC Comics in the early 70s, when he moved from Marvel, nobody produced the entire comic package on the West Coast for DC. And DC was very reluctant to, when Jack suggested Mike come in and ink and letter and deliver finished comics to DC. They hated that. They don't like, they were taking control out of the hands of their production department and their higher ups.
Maybe fuck.
That's a quote from Mark there. So anyway, DC did not like the idea of having Mike come in because it was a matter of control, not a matter of quality or what Jack wanted. But as soon as it started, after a few issues, everybody realized there, and certainly as comic readers, how much Mike brought to the work, and integrating the lettering, the logos, along with the inking, made for an incredible package that Jack realized right away was very powerful. And that's why Mike was Jack's favorite inker, in my opinion.
Well, and when I first met Jack, his primary desire was to find somebody on the West Coast simply who could ink. and my baptism of fire was the first thing I ever inked, and I went out to meet him. You know, I'll start at the beginning. I'm walking back to the house like 5 o'clock one evening. My wife and kids are AAU swimmers there at workout, and I hear the phone ringing in the kitchen. I run in and I go, "Hello, Mike Reiner, this is Jack Kirby. Alex Self says you're a pretty good inker." My first thought was, who's pulling my leg here? Yeah. And he asked me if I'd like to come out to the house and meeting. He was living briefly in Irvine.
Yes.
And so I went out, and he showed me the page, and it was a page that's kind of famous, I guess, now. The
It's
page
a
he did for
self-portrait
Romania, the self-portrait page where he's sitting at the board and all the characters are swirling off the paper around him. And I said, "Okay, I'll have it for you tomorrow morning." And he said, "No, why don't you just sit here at my board and do it?" Well, fortunately,
Not too much pressure.
yeah, no pressure at all.
He watched you ink that?
Working the way I worked with Russ Manning, I always had a duplicate set of brushes, pens, inks, erasers,
Yes.
razor, everything in the car, in a big shoebox. So I went out and brought my tools in, sat down at his drawing board,
Oh,
and
man.
like every 20 minutes, he'd come back in and look over my shoulder, and then he'd leave, and we broke, and Roz had made sandwiches, and we had sandwiches, and I met Lisa's older sister, the one and only time in my life I ever met her.
Really?
Lisa and Neil weren't there.
Okay.
And then when I finished the page, he thanked me, and that was about it. It wasn't like, "I'll call you again," or "Thank you very much," you know. And,
He had no comment at the time?
Oh, well, it was like the way Russ Manning used to compliment me. "That works." That's high praise from Russ Manning. "That works."
Yes.
I don't remember exactly if we had any kind of conversation that there might be something in the future. It just, it was done. I left, and it was like, whew. You know, Roz made great sandwiches.
Yeah.
And they,
They used to pay in sandwiches, though.
well, yeah. The whole atmosphere when I was there, from the very first meeting with Jack, was like, I'm now family. Whether you were or not, I felt like I was family.
Very true.
So I left, and I heard from him again, inked stuff for the Marines Toys for Tots programs. I inked his God's drawings that were hanging in his house. They were printed in a limited edition portfolio.
Yes.
And a lot of stuff I inked for Jack, like working on the Super World stuff.
Right.
Stuff that before the first of the comic books. But as Mark Evanair explained to me, in the beginning, Jack wanted to find an inker. But slowly, Jack realized how faithful I was to him, that I apparently gave a damn about what I was doing.
Yeah.
And the working at the house, he learned two things. It came from my hand alone, no help, and that I could work under pressure. And so there were all kinds of projects that I worked on. Jack was all kinds of things for Marvel Mania. Can you hear me? Because I don't even need this, actually. I project from my diagram. Anyway, so his whole plan, and he told me, he said, I'm going to New York. I can't tell you everything that's going on, but you are part of it. And the whole deal was he was leaving Marvel and he was going to DC, and I was going to be his inker letterer. Because not only had, you know, as Mark explained to me, not only had he found somebody who could ink and letter, but it was somebody whose work was what he wanted. And somebody explained to me once, maybe it was Eric Larson, somebody said, what you did for Jack is exactly what he would have done himself if he had the time and the ability.
Right. Oh, he had the ability, he didn't have the time.
But the time, mostly.
Yeah,
You know, well, and the ability meaning the wanting to.
Sure.
Wanting to do it that way.
No, he ain't plenty of work. at the
Oh,
time.
well, see, that's why, as a kid, late 40s and through the 50s, I was a big fan of Simon and Kirby comic books. I didn't know who was who.
Right.
But instinctually, there were stories that I knew. The man that penciled these also inked them.
Yes.
And as it turned out, that was Jack.
You can tell.
So I already had this feeling for Jack. I remember the first time I ever saw any of his Marvel work, pencils printed in a fanzine. I don't know if you remember Bill Spicer.
Absolutely.
I got-
Graphic Story magazine.
Well, he became the house letterer for Gold Key on my recommendation.
Right.
But I asked him, I said, why isn't anybody inking Jack? You know, because everybody was putting their self into it. And then lo and behold, he calls me, and he wants me to be with the chain when he leaves Marvel to go to DC. But DC had this sweetheart deal with Coletta, Some of it involved money, some of it involved women. But that's another story.
It's hard to compete with that. It's hard to compete with that.
Yeah. Anyway, and they hadn't heard of me, even though I'd been in the business maybe 4 or 5 years.
Because you're on the West Coast,
But
they
I was on the
didn't
West
even
Coast.
realize people were.
Well, most of West Coast publishers and editors felt the world ended at the Hudson River.
Right.
You know, there was nothing west of it.
Right.
And so they wouldn't have me. And finally, I think because Mark and Steve pointed out to Jack all the stuff that was being left out and changed and simplified, that they finally said, okay, you can have this kid. Because I know they fully believed that I would fail.
Yeah.
And I probably hoped I would fail. And to their chagrin, I didn't.
No.
I'm the only guy that ever kept up with everything Jack produced. Until I told him I wanted to take a little time off.
Which is, Jack Kirby produced a book a week plus, which is like 20 plus pages of work. When nobody else produced material, writing and drawing on that scale. So to be able to keep up with this guy was a full-time job. So.
Well, I've heard stories that Joe Sennett and Frank Giacoy used to have discussions about how the hell can this Royer guy eat 3 pages a day?
Can you talk a little bit about what you liked about Jack's Kirby and Simon work? I know you guys can't see it, but I have some of the war stories that you did. And what was it about the inking that really appealed to you and made you think it was different than the other stuff?
Well, there were guys that worked for their studio. They could emulate some of what Jack did.
Like Warren Mesk.
But it wasn't the same as. And I don't know what it was. When you fall in love with Miss Wright and decide you want to marry her, can you just sit down and say 3 things? What is it that this is why I've fallen in love with her? I don't think you can do that unless you're just faking it, and the next day it'll be 3 different things you pick. It's just, I like this one particular inking style, and it said to me, it's also the guy that penciled it. There was something about it that was natural and real, and how do I explain what a 12-year-old kid's thinking about, you know? I mean, my reading material consisted of Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, Walt Disney comics and stories, and Simon and Kirby comics, and all the Captain Marvel comics. I didn't care for Batman or Superman. And it's just, this one artist, there was just something of, I don't know what told me it was all from the same hand.
When you were a kid, did you copy comics at all?
No. Not really.
Okay.
What did you start out drawing then? How did you start drawing?
I mean, you were a big fan of Flash Gordon and Prince Valiant and
Oh yeah, I
and
love
those
that
guys.
stuff, and I discovered that looking for stamps in my grandmother's attic when I found all these sacks of Sunday comic sections from the early, mid, and late 30s into the early 40s.
Wow.
That had been left in the bottom of a trunk, and I went, oh my God! Now I had seen the Harvey Flash Gordon reprint comic at the market, and I just looked at the stuff and said, I love this stuff. And then when I realized that it came from these, I saw these comic sections, and you know, full-page Tarzans by Foster and Hogarth, and I just wanted to draw comic strips. Not comic books, but comic strips.
Yeah, okay.
And comic strips were an American institution then much, much bigger than they are
Oh,
today.
they were important, and it was only the war that ruined them.
Yes.
That's where it
paper
started.
shortage.
The paper shortage, artists who were doing a full page were now doing a half page, and by the 50s it's a third page.
And then they started selling advertising in the comic section, which took up a lot of space. They would have comics, ads drawn in the form of comic strips for all sorts of products.
Well, you take the war and the paper shortage and the cost of inking and all this kind of stuff when there's a war going on, and then you have the other medium of radio, which was so strong that movie theaters would stop projecting when Amos Nanny was on so the audience could listen to Amos Nanny being broadcast.
Otherwise they wouldn't come.
Yeah, and movies were a regular, I was going to say a religious happening. I mean, you religiously went to the movies certain nights or days of the week. I grew up as a Saturday matinee kid, we'd show up at the theater at a quarter till, no, at 11:15. I was born in 41, I'm now 80. That's fake news, but I'm
Unbelievable.
But between the years, I'm 30. But it was 15 cents to get in. Now, at age 12, it went to a quarter.
Wow.
So when I was 12, I took a piece of paper and printed a big 12 on it, put it under my cap, and I'd go up and put down my 15 cents. I'm under 12.
It was a quarter when I started going, so that's a long time.
You know, Thursday nights, the theater changed the program 3 times a week. And Thursday nights, when I would go to cowboy movies with my dad. And the first movie that I have any conscious memory of is Four Faces West with Joel McCrea. And to this day, I still love the film.
Great film.
And the uncut version is available on Blu-ray. Get it. The comic books and the comic strips, until the mid-40s, were still really important stuff.
It was a giant media. I mean, comic strips were as important as movies and radio.
Yeah.
And they were also, I mean, movies and radio mined the comics. All the big comics had movies and radio versions. You know, Superman and you know, Little Orphan Annie and everything. It was a giant idea farm for other media.
Even Snuffy Smith was in movies.
Yes.
And I know we're getting off the topic.
No, let's talk about, we can talk about Bud Duncan for an hour.
I mean, these guys are going to go on old stuff, and I'm like, I don't have anything to add because I'm much younger than them.
They should promote these things or schedule these things. I was at one convention that was the smartest convention I was ever at. I don't know whether it was Salt Lake or not. But every panel, there was a half an hour between each panel. So if you went an hour and 15 minutes, there wasn't some guy at 15 minutes and into the hour at the end holding up a card saying, "Get out!"
Yeah.
You know. Because we have something to say, and even if it's just a handful. My family, except for me, were musicians. It was the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, VFW, American Legion, Elks, that kind of.
Yeah.
But they
Up in Oregon.
My mom, my dad, and my brother, who in puberty was their drummer and was fantastic. You know.
Puberty will do that.
But I was the one that wanted to draw. My mother was a frustrated novelist and painter, and I just wanted to draw. Made my dad unhappy because I didn't want to kill Bambi and dress fish. But the nicest thing he ever said was,
It's hard to make them look good.
on his deathbed, he said, "I was wrong about 2 things, son. One, that I ever won an argument with your Uncle John, and 2, that you could make a living drawing pictures."
Oh. That's very nice.
That's really sweet.
Well,
That's really
yeah, I mean,
That's-
you know, that you could make a life drawing pictures. Or make a
Obviously,
living.
you didn't tell them how much you made.
No, when the first time they came down to our new house in Simi Valley, they knew that it was a pretty good living.
When you're out of Whittier to Simi Valley, yeah, it was a sweet.
I married
This
a
is
woman
when you
who-
were working for Disney and not DC, right?
Well, that last 7.5 years that I did Disney art, I was no longer technically a Disney artist because I quit the staff job at 14.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then I became in 3 days a full-time contractor, independent, for the Disney stores, doing the same thing. And the reason they wanted me is because they knew, somebody told them that I quit the staff job because it was either that or take a 44 Magnum to work. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to live a little longer. I was afraid to get raped by a couple of big guys in prison, so I didn't take the 44 Magnum to work. But I was blacklisted at the studio for 7 years because I had the gall to quit.
Yeah.
But the Disney stores nicknamed me the Pooh Man, and they had me correcting all the Pooh stuff that the new artists were creating after I left, because I established a style and tweaked everybody else's work.
Let's talk about that for a minute because you told me, probably the last time I saw you in San Diego, that working for Jack influenced your Disney work as to creating a dynamic picture and in composition on all of that, and I can see that.
I had in my head, Jack is over my shoulder, and he's saying 2 things. Do it your way, tell a story.
Now let's go eat.
No. And Roz is making sandwiches. No, it's, with few exceptions, everything I drew at Disney, and particularly when I was at the stores and doing the Pooh characters, as
That's
75% of my
correct. Yeah.
output was with Pooh. Yeah, with me, Pooh happens.
Okay.
But,
It wasn't a value judgment. That was
but I
the
did a lot of
character.
3D stuff with all the Fab Five and Beauty. I did some Beauty and the Beast stuff that God, I wish I had them. You know, but they sold off the shelves and they didn't bother to ever give you anything.
Of course.
Except the first 3D job I did for the stores was a whole kitchen ceramic set with Winnie the Pooh characters and cookie jar and salt pepper shakers.
Wow.
And my middle child, my second daughter, has them in her house in a display case. But you look at my just single character drawings, and you look at it and that's part of a story. There's something that goes with that.
Right.
And when I did the large group scenes, I tried to make them a story. And I started doing stuff that to this day I don't know how I did it. But I take these 16 by 22 sheets of 16-pound layout paper.
Which is enormous for an artist.
And I just put Pooh in the center. And then when I was finished, I had this whole scene of all the characters, you know, doing homemade Christmas presents or doing stuff, and I sit back and I go, did I do this? But
you were thinking about what each character was doing.
Each character was doing and where they would be placed, and when I was done, it was like, the design works. And I've suddenly understood why writers sometimes say, my character just takes over and wrote the book. Whatever idea I had in my head, and thinking Jack Kirby who would start at a corner and finish with a page that was perfectly designed.
Right. And that was, to anybody who saw Jack draw, you've never seen anybody else work like that. Nobody laid out.
And there were a handful of times that I did that on some big things for the Disney stores. In fact, I had reproduced one of them. I recreate a lot of my own work because every time it's a little bit different, and I'm not creating new Disney stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just revisiting my stuff. And my dentist, I had some fillings done, and the bill was like $580, you know. And he said, do you have any of your art? And I said, well, I'll bring some over. And this big scene, I showed it to him. He says, taken care of. And I don't know what he's got in mind, because I was at the dentist a week ago and had the x-rays and the teeth cleaning and the polishing and the counting that they do, and I never paid him a dime. But when I left that time, he said, let's do this again. So I guess when I go in to have this new filming done, I'll take a binder of art with me.
I wish we could all get away with
Yeah,
that.
man.
That'd be a
What's
wrap.
he
But no, to get back to Jack influenced me, but both Russ Manning and Jack Kirby influenced me in everything I ever drew. I look at a lot of stuff that I drew for Jim Warren, and some of it I just want to throw up.
Yes.
Some of it I go, this works. Because I think because of my exposure with both of them, I became a decent storyteller. Now people have to understand what a cartoonist means when they say storyteller. We all know that you go from panel 1 to panel 2 and down to panel 3 and down. But a good storyteller takes you into that panel where he wants you to go. You just don't go automatically. You follow the design and you go there first, and then you follow through and you're shoved down here and you're bumped over here. So it's no longer a case you go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's you go where the storyteller wants you to go. And that's what I observed and learned from Russ Manning, and was amplified with all of my time with Jack Kirby. So I think I've done some things in my career that I think is damn good storytelling.
I do too. And Russ
Unfortunately,
Manning,
some of it was done at a time when I still had a lot of academics to learn.
well, there's something to
So,
that. But Russ Manning and Jack Kirby, both excellent storytellers. Russ Manning did Tarzan for years. He did created Magnus Robot Fighter,
Which is Tarzan in the year 4000.
right, and incredible stuff. But the approach, the way they tell a story, is diametrically opposite to Jack Kirby's, and so to have to be study and work under two different artists who had so much to offer, but were so different.
Well, I was at a WonderCon or something once, no, whatever it was, a thing in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
That was a 1 or 2 day thing. And I sat on a panel, Russ Manning here and Jack Kirby here.
Wow.
And knowing that both guys, with the way they're talking about art, is they had unassuming egos.
Yes.
In their mind, what they were doing was the best way to do it.
Well, we all do that.
You know, and what was funny though, when they were doing that European, I did an 8-page story where the Don Bluth script was like written for a motion picture camera, not for, you know. It's like there's this huge chasm and the smoke's coming up from the lava.
Cartoons.
And the girl is over here and the guy's over here and they recognize each other and the surprise is I'm saying, this is a friggin' long shot and I'm supposed to show their facial expressions. So I did these little inset panels of their faces. When I showed it to Russ, he went, well, that works. And I should have said, well, how the hell would you have done it, Russ?
He would have drawn it all. He would have drawn a banner with the marching Roman legions behind them.
But still, you wouldn't have seen their facial expressions.
No, you wouldn't.
Anyway, well, I did a 4-page Starsman story once for Gold Key, and I was having trouble with this one panel. It was just a close-up of Tarzan. And I said, screw it. I grabbed the proofs and I literally traced a Manning head, which is fair.
It is fair.
It's fair game. And when I showed him the page, he said, I don't know, I have a problem with that head. So they all have their own egos, which I think in both of the cases, it wasn't anything you ever over-noticed, you know.
Well, you know, you were so faithful to Jack, and I'm just going to bring this up because I find it interesting. When you first started, you know, inking Jack very faithfully, but doing tiny tweaks like in a Wallywood eye highlight or something like that.
I was with a little highlight.
Right, and the famous incident of like Big Barda in that full page spread where you hutened up her face.
And he said, he called me and says, don't ever change the faces. And I never did after. He never noticed that I thinned her waist or ankles.
But the face, everybody.
It's the face. That was very important to him.
No, it was.
Did you start leaving off panel borders on your own?
That was my own.
And what did Jack say about it?
He didn't say anything because it worked.
Yeah.
And if you look at my pages and there's no border, it still works. And it makes things more poster-like. And the colors at DC, God bless them, they understood and they left white. Because in 1966, I keep bringing this up, and none of you were born before that, I'm sure, but the King Flash Gordon comic books, the 3 issues that Al Williamson drew and his first wife Arlene colored, they're just full of white.
And everything worked.
Now, I did the same thing when Jack went back to Marvel, and they finally agreed, okay, we'll take the Warrior Kid. You know, I did the same thing, but they would fill color to make borders.
Yes, I remember that.
And it's like, a Captain America, I thought, when this is colored, this is Captain, there's 3 figures in a panel and a little text. I said, they'll just pop off the page. No, they didn't pop off the page because they had the solid color block behind them, so it formed borders.
And the open panels were something that Russ Manning did a lot. So is that something you picked up from him? Because I remember him doing that in the Tarzan books.
No, I think it was really Williamson's influence.
Okay, well, Williamson as well. I was trying to go back to Manning.
You know, and of course Manning was influenced, believe it or not, by Williamson.
I believe
I subscribed to some newspaper that would have all 6 dailies printed.
Wow.
And I would take those out, and Russ and I would look at them, and Russ would say, look at this. This guy, the storytelling. The first panel, I've told people about this, and then X9. The first panel is a close shot of X9 and the villains. And the next panel is the alley, with a garbage can, with the lid askew and a wooden pallet against the wall, and their dialogue's coming from the window. But like Russ says, you know exactly where the hell they are. And then the last panel is a longer shot. But also the blacks or the lines of the people shows us all tied together, you know. And so we went from the first panel up to the window.
Right.
And the dialogue. And then you go down and you see the garbage can and the pallet, and it's a friggin' alley.
Yeah.
And Al did a lot of borderless stuff. And probably he influenced me more than Russ did. Because if you look at the early Magnuses and those things, they were using the New York tree-lined, blue-lined paper.
For the letter.
And they always allowed for this 1/4 inch on every panel. I don't understand that nonsense.
They didn't want the balloons touching the panel edge.
Yeah.
They thought that was sloppy.
But if brush didn't rule the panel, it still had color forming
Yeah.
the borders. And I think that was just me thinking that this is going to look poster-like. It's really, and I think, I just glanced at the pack this morning. Somebody came up to have a sign. That's from the pack.
Yep.
Yep. And I thought, God, I left out a lot of borders.
You did.
But the colorists seem to understand. Now, Anthony Tolan will gladly take credit for that, you know. We're friends, but I don't think he colored any of those books.
I was not a fan of the original coloring in the books, so it was of the DC Fourth World books.
Oh, really?
As a kid,
Well, I
So
like
I understood
the borders.
Jackson.
No, I agree with that. But I thought their palette was very muddy.
when I saw those, I thought, God, Jack's this young, hot guy doing this experimentals. I didn't have any of the history. I just got, because I got that stuff at 9, 10, and that's what, you know, and I was just blown away by this stuff. I'm curious, when you had to do these double-page spreads, how the hell did you do that?
Well, I still had to do that in a single page. I had to do 3 pages a day.
So you just sat down and started at the top left corner and drew it?
I would start somewhere.
Did you think about
They would
like
have
foreground, middle
lettered
ground, background?
and bordered, and I would just pick something that,
Would you do the
Part of the drawing.
foreground figure first to do an outline?
no, a lot of times I do the backgrounds first.
That's interesting.
Were you
Because
working
that way, the lines around the foreground characters would have the weight that would separate them.
That's interesting.
Were you doing pen in the background at first, or were you brush inking backgrounds?
There were some pages of Forever People, that there are pages that every line on there is pen.
Mhm.
And then there are pages where the same kind of lines, it's all brush. It's whether the muse was with you. I learned from Sparky Moore that if the muse isn't with you, use whatever tool you can, if it's a damn matchstick. You need something that will work. And there were days that the muse was with me, and I could take that brush, and I could draw Gillette 290 lines, you know, fine
Yeah.
pen lines.
Yeah.
And other days, it's like, what the fuck? You know, I
Yeah.
have the pen point, excuse my
Yeah.
language.
It's true.
It's just, and, yeah, it's the second book that the guy in Portland wrote on how to drink for comic books. How to ink for comic books.
Well, no, I think he was on the right track.
I can't remember his name because
Gary Martin.
he inked one of my Mickey Mouse stories and he really screwed it up.
Yeah,
Gary
Martin.
Gary Martin.
He screwed it.
There was 3 artists. I did one of the, oh God, I love the artists.
Steve Rude.
No, it wasn't Steve Rude. It was, anyway, everybody wrote an essay. And everybody wrote about their tools and stuff like this. And I said, what you're looking at here is just 1 page. And when I inked it, to me, this was 1 page of 20, and there's a clock ticking inexorably on the corner of my drawing board that there's a deadline to be met.
Right.
So I approached even this page for this book in that way. And we can talk about the tools I use, but the whole point is you get it done. And if the muse isn't with you, use whatever you can. You use a sponge, a matchstick, you know. I made corrections based on an interview in an early alter ego from Roy Thomas way back. Joe Cooper said I make corrections with a razor blade.
Sure.
Well, that's back when 2-ply actually there were 2 plies.
Yeah.
It's much harder now because 2-ply is not 2-ply.
No.
But I still make corrections with razor blades.
Yeah.
It's faster than working with white,
Mhm.
you know, and of course the best whiteout that was made isn't made anymore. It was called snow paste.
Snow page.
Yeah.
Snow paste beats the pants off, but, you know,
No.
it's like Beta was better than VHS.
Right.
VHS does it long. Anyway, I'm sorry.
That's
The things that Mark wanted me to talk about, have we talked about any of them?
Yeah, you just know. I'm just totally delighted to be here and listen to this. I'm being completely.
I have a
happy.
medical problem, it's called overactive blather.
Blabber. Well, we're just trying to point you in a different direction every once in a while.
Yeah,
Let you loose.
well, I guess I want to follow up on the pen stuff and the brush, because how did you react to, like, when you get Jack's pencils, it's all texture. you see guys who fill in black now, and they obsessively, I don't understand this, like guys fill in every square inch.
Or they just put X's.
Or they put X's.
Yes.
The guys that put in X's, I think, should not be doing that.
I think it's crazy.
Because they have no idea how that's going to look when it's actually ink. That's why Jack always did his blacks, even if they hurried the lines. And sometimes I would interpret those and leave white areas in them because it gave character.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing about Jack's early inks, is Jack's early inks are these balls out brush drawing that are filled with character. And my feeling, your inks, like I love Siddha's inks, and Siddha's inks are just totally polished and fine-tuned.
Polished, right.
But your inks have this, I mean, you
It's
have a roughness and a texture too that
When I was in New York 3 or 4 years ago, I told people, I said, I've been asked, what is the difference between Joe Sennett and Mark Reuter? You have to understand the dichotomy of the motion picture industry during the golden age of Hollywood.
Okay.
Joe Sennett inked Jack Kirby, MGM.
Okay.
I inked Jack Kirby, Warner Brothers.
Yeah. Maybe a little Republican there too. So.
Yeah.
Monogram, if you would, is a bad
No,
word.
but the best of the Republic is good Warner Brothers.
No, that's true. Okay.
But it's just, from those first meetings with Jack, I knew he was a Warner Brothers guy.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, Joe Sennett put every, as their motto was like, every star in the galaxy or something.
In every shadow under every
You know,
rock.
now, I love the pre-code movies, and one of my favorite MGM pre-codes is because it's strictly a Warner Brothers pre-code with gloss and every star in the galaxy in it, you know. But, and Joe Sennett just made everything so lush and beautiful, but to me, he lost a lot of power. And I think Jack was right in telling me not to fix the faces. However, he drew so fast sometimes I would make sure the eyes were on the same level.
Right, Jack would get excited, there'd be an eye up here and an eye down here. And for a dramatic emphasis, he would draw eyes open and different, open on one side and closed on the other, and it could get pretty confusing. If you,
But I tried to homogenize it a little bit, and he never noticed that, because he didn't notice anything was changed. It was his intent when he looked at it. Now, the reason Coletta got away with so much is that Jack had spent so many years with other people inking and stuff, he would just glance at it and, you know.
probably because he didn't want to look at it much more than a glance.
Maybe he was because psychologically he didn't want to
Yeah.
see what was happening.
Right.
And that's why Mark says, and, you know, I don't believe everything Mark says.
Ebonnaire, you're saying?
Huh?
Ebonnaire?
Yeah.
Yeah, just for the folks out there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Mark is a great storyteller. And I worked with a guy at Disney who was like that. We went out to lunch one day, we stopped at a music store, we were looking at CDs, and a girl walked by and smiled at us. When we got back to the studio telling somebody else, we stopped at the music store, and then that gal came on to us like gangbusters. That's a storyteller.
That's a storyteller, okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
where were we?
Mark's storytelling about Coletta.
Oh, well, what about Coletta? I'm the only guy, I think, in that book that Tomorrow's published, what, The Thin Black Line, or what
Yes,
it's called?
yes,
You know,
yes.
but
About-
there was much more you could say about Coletta than quarter of an inch. I'm being facetious. I love the way he inked blonde women's hair in the romance comic books.
That is the one thing he's fairly unbeatable at.
Yeah.
His hair.
That was great stuff. But I'm the guy that in that book said something positive about Coletta. Everybody knows that I don't care for his work because of his cheating, you know. But I said, that's the mantra that I got into the business on. Sparky Moore saying you get your first job on your ability, every job after that was on your dependability, and if you gave Vinny a book on Friday and said, I need this Wednesday, he was there Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, and that counts for a lot in an industry that is not publishing art, they're selling paper by the ton. And if you're not there, you don't have your deadline done, they still pay for the press time.
Yeah.
If that comic is not there, that's thousands and thousands of dollars, and those people will never work again, because they remember that.
Deadlines were, I don't think it's so much serious now, but back
Well,
You
it
know, I
might-
got in the 80s and they were still pretty serious.
Direct
And
sales is what changed it.
then direct sale, yeah, that's true.
Because an
Direct
artist
sales-
didn't have a book done, so they just notify all the retailers, it'll be a little bit late.
Right, and that's a different situation.
I probably use a harsher word, but I think it was the age of the prima donnas.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
that says it.
I would say we were, I was, you know, we were all 25 and thought we were hot shit.
I'm not being nasty.
No, I'm not arguing with them.
different-
I'm just affirming it as
It's a
from the
different
other
work
end.
ethic and a different requirement from the companies.
Yeah.
So, and that
That's
was
about
what
it.
was most important, that when the companies wanted it, so.
Can you talk about, as a kid, as a professional, as a artist, whatever I am, making all these little explosion lines and what is the greatest punch ever when Steppenwolf hits Isaiah? in
If the
pad?
muse was with me, I could do it freehand with a brush.
Wow.
If the
You-
muse wasn't with me, I had a triangle that had pennies glued to it, which raised it above the surface of
We
the
all
page.
did, yeah, that's a trick.
And it had to be the right height that it wouldn't run under
Yes.
and smear, screw up your art. But you would take the pen and press it, and then so it'd go to a fine point. And I didn't like it when I saw artists doing that, because at the border, it was never as thick right at the border as it was just beyond it. Because they would start the pen just at the border and pull, so it didn't have the full pressure on it. So I would start outside the border.
And a lot of people did that, and I always wondered about that. So, and a lot of people think that when you do those explosion lines, you go from thin to thick.
No, it's thick
But
to
it's
thin.
actually, no, they're saying that's the common assumption.
Oh, it's thick to thin.
It's thick to thin, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
And I would take a razor blade and then peel off where it went over the border.
Right.
Or if I was too lazy, I'd take some of that roll-out tape, white tape, and put it over.
That's
it,
what
you
I
know.
used.
I mean, yeah, there were formulas and tricks that you would use.
Yeah.
But I would always study other people doing those speed lines and could tell when they were using a brush
Yeah,
and when they weren't. And I think Sennett used as many triangle things as I did.
yeah.
And if the muse is with you, you can do it pretty damn good with the brush.
And
But with the brush, you start at the thin and go thick.
which is really hard to do. That's a lot of control.
Yeah.
That's,
And let me bring up something about the influence that Joe Sennett had on Jack Kirby. Everybody talks about Jack Kirby's crackle.
the little dots, that's like
black
electrical
circles.
energy. Yeah.
Well, when Jack first penciled those things, they were just, this is the wrong word, but unarticulated blobs.
Right, they weren't circles
They
as
weren't
such.
round things. And Joe Sennett took a Speedball B5 and did it that way. And they became design elements rather than just blobs.
Right. And you could
and-
see other inkers like Vince Coletta did not do that. They would just make smooshes,
Yeah.
you know.
And
Bad swishes.
I just essentially knew, looking at Sennett, that that's a friggin' Speedball number 5. you
Sure.
know. And so that's what I started doing, but by that time Jack was penciling in that way, because he would see that Sennett was doing it.
Yeah.
Which means he did pay attention to Sennett's inking.
And for good reason, you
Yeah.
know.
But if you really understand, I'm a movie nerd, a Saturday matinee kid, and so people that are maybe 20 years younger than me and still saw the golden age of Hollywood know what I mean when I say Joe Sennett's MGM and I was Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
Because Warner Brothers put on the screen only enough to sell the story.
right.
And MGM put everything, including any stuff you didn't need,
Right.
to tell the story. And Jack always put on the page what sold the story. So that's, to me, what makes them Warner Brothers. And when we talked about movies, they were always Warner Brothers.
Right. Well, Cagney, you
Yeah.
know, Edward G. Robinson, you can see all of those Warner Brothers characters in his books.
All the time.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of Robert Montgomerys or
No, they don't.
like that. Yeah.
You know, and I don't know who the actor would be, but Terrible Turpin is right out of a Warner Brothers movie. All these,
Yeah,
all these
it'd
characters.
be Eugene Pallett. Eugene Pallett,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know. Okay.
I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it.
Paulette?
Paulette, I think is
Okay.
the way I've
Well,
heard it.
but that's who, you know, he
Yeah.
talks like a frog. Hey, listen, you guys. So.
Oh, he's the only guy that, in Robin Hood, he fences right-handed, and in the Marco Zorro, he's left-handed.
Right, he's Friar Tuck in Robin Hood. Oh, my God.
Yeah, he fences right-hand, but he's the friar in Mark of Zorro with Tyrone Power, and he fences with his left.
Wow. Let's do a panel on Eugene Pallett.
Well, I think he's one of those character actors that doesn't get his due.
No.
He goes back to the end of silent years.
Yes,
you
he
know.
does.
And
A famous anti-Semite, by the way. A famous anti-Semite, by the way.
oh, he was?
Yep. He was famous for it. We'll talk about that at the panel next time.
Well, it's like, you know, Walt Disney had his problems.
Yeah.
And one of them was not allowed on the lot until Walt died, and he was the head of the division I worked in. And our nickname for him was the living excrement.
That wasn't his Christian name. Okay. Anyway, I'm on
Ask
official
another
time
question.
here.
You've got the,
We have 10 minutes. So
We
why
have
don't
10 minutes. Well, do you guys, I'm like just flipping through these and going, God, I love all these. I'm getting lost in the stories all over again. How did you do this page?
Can you turn that for the crowd, please?
how did I do it?
Days of the Mob.
There's no borders on it, are there?
No, there's no
No.
borders on it. There's just the greatest brushstrokes in the history of comics.
It's a scene
Well,
of-
I don't know if you people know who Richard Kyle was, but Richard Kyle coined the expression graphic novel. And Richard had a successful bookstore in Long Beach and published a magazine devoted to
Graphic Story Magazine.
Graphic Story Magazine.
And he did Street Code too. Wasn't he the guy who
Yeah,
published
he commissioned it.
So he
was
commissioned
responsible for
Street
Jack doing
Code.
Street Code.
I don't know if you guys saw the very first image, and this was the.
But when I was
street
working
scene.
on this story, he came over to visit me. And he walked in and he looked at the page and he says, Mike, you're doing Simon and Kirby. I said, you betcha. Because when those pencils came, to me, it's not, you can't compare it to 50s and say it's the same. But if you knew the 50 stuff and you look at it, you know that I'm thinking Simon Kirby.
Right.
It's really obvious when you look at Days of the Mob that you were going back to Simon and Kirby.
Oh, it's obvious to other people?
Yeah, when I got-
my whole mindset was,
No.
is that I want to be faithful to these things and make it look like Jack inked it in the 50s.
Right, and a panel I want to do one of these days that'll probably get one or all of us sued is to look at and grapple with the misnomer of the name Simon and Kirby that's attached to the artwork. That a lot of us assume that Joe Simon had a lot more to do with than he actually did.
He was the money man.
Right, but
The businessman.
but I and the general consensus, what people would write about the work, it was that Simon was the inker and sometimes the writer, and that's not the case as
Well,
it turned out.
I've heard people tell me that, oh, you're wrong about that. But Roz inked a lot of Jack's stuff.
Yes, she did the outlining,
Yeah.
but going back to actual Simon and Kirby, that is a subject that needs to be explored more.
Well, if you're the kid that's having your dad buy it off the rack at the grocery store, you know, your regular market, a Simon and Kirby production.
Well, that's a brand
I figured
name.
It was two guys.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was the shop's name, you know.
Right.
And-
And well,
Well,
that's a big subject that we should do at another time.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
you can
like-
see different styles in those books, so I figured,
Well, there's more Meskin and Berto Permanani and all these other people.
Poo-poo people I never knew at the time. And
Neither did I, and figured out
years
later.
later, I hear that, you know. I didn't know that the Rugelmoore that drew those Tarzan Sundays was the same Ruben Moriora that
Yes.
took over the Casey Ruggles comic strip when Tufts left it.
Or Drew Raymond, TV detective for Detective Comics.
History you will never get anywhere else.
And yes, and never,
never
we'll forget
remember
about
now.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know why I would decide to leave a page unpaneled. I just look at it and I go, this doesn't need the panel.
Mhm.
And particularly if it's a black and white comic, it doesn't need it. And
Isn't that
I guess
half
you
of a
picked a good
two-page
page.
spread?
Did I even panel the side of the
No,
body.
no, you didn't panel, because I think this was a
It's just the
full-page
black's
bleed.
ended a straight,
Yeah,
have a straight border.
yeah.
That is a half of a double page spread?
No,
that's a single.
It's
Okay.
a single-page spread.
Okay.
I just get to gloat because this is on my wall in my living room. So I look at that every morning.
Well,
And I have to say, I'm still, after 20 years, 30 years of having it up on my walls, looking at it every day, I'm still amazed at the inking and that, the drawing and at the
Well, I
composition.
think
I'm
I
like,
have
it's
fun
my
doing it.
ideal comic book page in the universe.
We
is
call
that
it
page.
fun under the gun.
The only book that I didn't enjoy inking, I don't know why, it was, whatever, was Devil Dinosaur.
Oh,
Huh.
Because there were so many backgrounds full of trees and foliage and stuff.
but no straight lines. I would think you'd love that.
You couldn't just take it all in brush?
No
over?
city.
No, I inked a lot of those backgrounds with the old Niji stylist, which over the years turns purple.
Oh,
I
right.
never knew you used those on.
Because there was so damn much foliage, and when you look at the pact and some of those things, that's all inked with a brush.
That's similar. What he's talking about is similar to today's microns, but not with permanent ink in them.
Yeah.
I never knew you did
The
that.
backgrounds drove me nuts.
You cheater.
The dinosaur and the characters and the cavemen were fun, but
Yeah.
there were so many of those foliage backgrounds.
Yes.
And
A lot of leaves and grass.
to do it with the brush would have taken longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I now when they were printed, nobody could tell the difference. Now, when I returned to actually inking, was when I moved back to Oregon in 2000, and Steve Root asked me to ink his 3 or 4 part Thor Godstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, anyway, Steve, he said, ink this for me. I want you to ink it. And I hadn't really done any inking since I did a 6-page story for Mike Thibodeau and his Last of the Viking Heroes or something. And, I had acquiesced to Steve's begging on that Mr. Miracle special, but other than that, I
Which
really
was
did
really
no
nice.
inking during the Disney years, unless it was on something Disney.
Right.
Oh, and the Black Hole strip, which I got the job for Jack.
Right. The Sunday
The Sunday Black Hole.
adaptation.
And on the last page, Jack was so bored with it because the scripts were so boring, and he didn't deviate because he didn't want to upset those idiots at Disney who wouldn't know good from bad.
Right.
He said, Mike, he says, just lay out the last Sunday for me. So the last Sunday, Mike Royer laid it out for Jack.
Wow. I'm going to go back and look now.
Yeah,
That's
no,
let
take
me,
it out.
really quick, because we only have a minute. There was a story that was done for originally, I think, one of the black and white magazines. It was a mystery story, so it's probably Spirit World 2.
It was intended for Spirit World, and it wound up in one of their color books.
Yeah,
and
like-
they added artwork to the panels, and whoever added it was crap.
But it was a story unique in that it was written and roughly laid out by Jack and finished by Mike as an experiment to see how that would work.
Oh.
And that must have been a killer.
It's nowhere near as good as it should have been. But I was conscious that Jack, I got the implication he wanted to look like him.
Yes,
And I could have made it a lot better if I just made it Mike Royer.
I agree. But I think you did a damn creditable job, but it is really a matter of being betwixt and between them.
Well, actually, that was drawn for the color book, not a black and white original.
Okay.
And you know where I did that? At Al Williamson's.
Oh,
Because that was that year, whatever year it was, well, the last year I went to the Suling's 4th of July convention, I stayed at Williamson's a week before the con and a week afterwards.
I think it was 72.
It'd be 72. I found a letter in my files the other day from Al Williamson, written to me in July of 1973, and he says, Mike, I missed you so much. At the Phil Suling's 4th of July convention, it was so boring without you that I went home a day early.
It's a great guy.
I got to send that to that Williamson group, you know.
I think that would be great.
I have all of his Christmas cards, you know. And,
Yeah, one of the greatest artists in comics,
and
and unusually an amazing inker for Jack, and that people would never guess would be a great
When
inker
did he
for Jack.
ink?
Do that again. Race to the Moon.
Yeah.
In '58 for Harvey. He did the Three Rocketeers or whatever that.
Okay.
He inked about 4 or 5 stories of books were absolutely incredible. You never think that Williamson and Kirby would work together, and it was gorgeous.
Well, it turned out to be an amazing anchor at the end, you know.
For
all the
Marvel,
other
yes.
people, you know.
Well, Al,
Made a lot of shitty
I became
artists
a part
look
of
good.
Williamson's family.
A nice
In
family to be in.
1970, I go to visit Al, and he says, don't go back to New York, stay here and you can fly out of Albany. And I stayed there for 3 days. I was introduced to his elderly mother who was living with Al and his first wife who died early of cancer. What a sweetheart. She colored this stuff and lettered for him. But her name was Sally. On the second day, she says, don't call me Sally, Mike, just call me Mom. So I called Al Williamson's mother, Mom. And I'd call from the West Coast, and she'd answer the phone. I says, hey, Mom, it's Mike. She said, I'll get Al. You know.
No, well, you were just a kid of like 29, 30 then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that.
And well, Al was only 10 years older than me. And I met Reed Crandall
Wow.
at Williamson's.
Wow.
In fact, I have a daily X9 strip that has both Reed and me in it.
Wow.
I was in X9 for twice, and my license plate on both my car in California and Oregon, personalized plate, and all the X9 strips, whenever Al drew a car, the license plate was 39013,
Oh.
which is the name of the villain in Republic, one of their greatest serials, Daredevils of the Red Circle, which Al loves, and showed me
It's
the
a
first
great
night I
one.
stayed at his house.
That's great.
Wow.
Oh, I had it 16 millimeter as well.
You can get it in Blu-ray now, and it's gorgeous.
Oh, absolutely, unbelievable.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in that one
Nice.
in this one daily strip that I'm in, I'm walking across the street in the middle panel with a portfolio, and in the background is a Mustang, and the digits on the license plate are not 39013. They're the first 6 digits of my 7-digit telephone number.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. All right, you know what? Hold on. We're done. Sorry. Let's thank Mike Royer, Art Destroyer. That's what he said. Mike Royer, Art Destroyer.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Mark sent me an email of all the things he wanted to talk about. Did we get near any of it?
Yeah, totally. I'm
I think it
completely
worked.
happy. It's the best panel I've ever been on.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so
You're
much.
the greatest.
A real pleasure.
And thank you guys for listening. That was a pleasure for us as much as for
Well, the
anybody.
reason I went to
And
that
I'm
to New
sorry
York for
we
the
don't
first time
have
in
a
30
slideshow.
years
But this was just as
Carbonaro
good, if
said,
not better.
I want you. You have stories nobody's heard before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my God. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.